From the beginning of our nation's history, immigrants have been feared, harassed, and victimized, even though almost everyone in this country is either an immigrant or we have descended from immigrants. Without immigrants, our nation would not be a nation. And yet, all across our land, states and communities are attempting to legislate the removal of undocumented immigrants, or illegal aliens, as many call them, as if they were invaders from outer space. The new law in Arizona authorizing police to arrest individuals who cannot show documents proving that they are in the country legally has divided that state and this country. The law would legalize racial profiling and breeding while undocumented, as one columnist put it. It reminds me of the New Yorker cartoon that shows a policeman escorting a handcuffed man to a patrol car while telling him, anything you say with an accent may be used against you. But, it makes me wonder if we've already forgotten that the system of internal passports was one of the most repressive features of life in Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, and apartheid-era South Africa. A federal judge has blocked central provisions of the Arizona law from taking effect, backing the Obama administration's claim that the federal government has authority in immigration matters. But in other states, including our own state of Virginia, and in many communities, vigorous efforts are being made to remove immigrants. If you saw the documentary Liberty 9500, and how many of you have seen that? Fabulous film. We had a full house here 2 weeks ago in Fellowship Hall. And if you've seen that film, you know that Prince William County, just a 30-minute drive down the road from here, was engulfed in an explosive battle over immigration policy when elected officials adopted a law very similar to the law in Arizona, which required police to stop immigrants and to question them and question their legality. Now, many residents decided to organize against this racist legislation using YouTube videos and virtual town halls, and they did succeed in reversing the decision after a hard-fought struggle. But I was deeply moved by watching this film, seeing the faces and hearing the voices of people who were repeatedly denigrated and denied their basic human rights, and yet who would not give up. Everyone agrees that we need immigration reform, but few agree on the kind of reform we need. In spite of billions spent on fences, raids, patrols, and prisons, the number of undocumented immigrants has increased since 1992 from 4 million to 12 million, and they now account for 3 to 5% of our population. They are also a part of our economic and social fabric, providing a large percentage of essential unskilled labor as well as other labor. Having little opportunity to legally immigrate has meant that illegality has become the norm. The Washington Post recently calculated that with roughly 1.6 million immigrants in some stage of immigration proceedings, the government holds more detainees than Clarion hotels have guests, operates nearly as many vehicles as Greyhound bus lines, and flies more people each day than do many small U.S. airlines. And the result of all of this complication has been chaos and pain. It's hard for most of us to imagine the terror and suffering experienced by undocumented immigrants. Families have been uprooted from their homes and communities, sent back to their nation of origin where they may be vulnerable to political retribution or economic deprivation. Children have been separated from parents, and all undocumented immigrants live in darkness, fearful that they will be someday discovered and returned. I sometimes imagine what I would do if I lived in a country where my family could barely survive, and there was an opportunity for me to cross the border into a more prosperous land that would enable me to provide for them. And I hope that I would have the courage to do so. The irony is that our nation is largely responsible for causing many undocumented immigrants to cross our border. When our government passed the North America Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, in 1993, it created a crisis in Mexico where most undocumented immigrants come from. 2 million Mexican farmers have been driven off their land by subsidized U.S. imports. And half the Mexican population lives in poverty, making less than $3 a day, while 13 million people live in extreme poverty, making less than $1 a day. But there is a surprising lack of sympathy for those who seek to improve their lives by coming to this country. In fact, I'm shocked by the anger and racism and hatred directed towards immigrants, both documented and undocumented. In Prince William County, some of the anonymous emails on a website of an anti-immigration organization described immigrants as animals, and they were threatened with lynching. This dehumanizing attitude reminds me of the bullying against young gay people that's causing a rash of suicides. And I wonder what kind of darkness people live in to have so much hate in their hearts towards people who are different from them. I'm reminded of the words of Anne Lamott, who wrote, "You can safely assume that you've created God in your own image when it turns out that God hates all the people you do." Much of this stereotyping and animosity comes from a complete ignorance of facts. There are many myths about immigrants that need to be dispelled. One myth is that immigrants take jobs from American workers. But the facts show that immigration has a positive effect on the American economy as a whole and on the income of Native American workers. Immigrants tend to have different skills which allow higher skilled Native workers to increase productivity and income. And they are more likely to pay taxes than to use public services. Just imagine what it would be like if all those 12 million undocumented workers disappeared all of a sudden. Our economy would be devastated. Then there's the myth that today's immigrants are not integrating into American life like past waves did. And the fact is that the same accusation has been made against virtually every group of immigrants in our history. Today, as before, immigrant integration takes a generation or two. That's just how it happens. Learning English is a key, and our church sponsors classes in English as a second language to help immigrants improve their language skills. Providing good schools for immigrant children is another key. But passing laws that keep immigrant children from attending school or from being eligible for in-state tuition at public colleges and universities keep them from becoming productive citizens and threatens to create an underclass. Perhaps the biggest myth is that immigration is unfixable. Building our walls higher and forcing undocumented immigrants to return will not solve this crisis. We need a common sense approach that will be fair and realistic. First of all, we need to create legal avenues to enter the U.S. by providing visas and a path to permanent residence over time for those who would not displace Native workers. Undocumented workers need an opportunity to come out of the shadows by registering with the government, going through security checks, and being allowed to gain permanent legal status. Finally, by creating legal channels for those immigrants who wish to contribute to our prosperity, the resources that have been used to track them down can be diverted to establish effective security and enforcement enforcement against real terrorism. This reform can transform immigration from a crisis that divides us to a reality that can return our nation to its prominence as an economic and moral leader in the world. One step in that direction is to pass the DREAM Act, which would create a path to citizenship for undocumented young adults who have lived in the U.S. for 5 years or